Okay, good evening, and we are live. And boy, from the looks of it, we have a good group of people on tonight. Lots of people participating, and some new attendees as well. So, greetings. Hopefully, you're able to see the stream. Everything's good. Um, where we can interact is if you're watching on YouTube, you have the chat uh, little chat page next to you, so you can just, as I'm doing right now, chat right here, and then everybody can see it. We can have a discussion. So welcome. This should be interesting. Um, Clearly, we are not happy with what happened with the election. And unfortunately, um, while the recount is a big news story, my concern is, and others have voiced this concern, that it's largely a distraction from having a really in-depth analysis of where we need to go from here and how we can better uh, do better in elections, in the coming years. So, with that in mind, we're going to do a little analysis here, and it's going to be a little bit different analysis than what you may have seen in other avenues and other media outlets. So, we're going to talk about what happened in Wisconsin. And what really happened in my mind, and I'm sure you've read this in other places, is that um, what people believed and what they valued mattered way more than data. We hear a lot of talk about data and the need for good data and how to use data, but the final analysis was that in the states that needed to be won to win the electoral college, the people's values and beliefs mattered more than the data. So, what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at what happened. One of the things that has been kind of a big story here in Wisconsin. Oh, and by the way, I'll just say, feel free to just jump right into the chat room. There will be some places for you to respond specifically to lend your thoughts and ideas a little bit later this evening. But if you have a question or anything, just jump right in. So, what happened? Basically, Wisconsin Democrats didn't show up. We saw 117,000 less total votes cast in 2016 than 2012. And one of the things that was really unusual this election, and this has fueled a lot of the conspiracy theories that are fueling the recount, is that there were 230,000 less votes cast for the presidential ticket this year than there were in 2012. And if you look at those two numbers, what that, oh, yes, Nancy, good question. Welcome, since you're new. The PowerPoint will be posted alongside the webinar recording on my website tomorrow, so you'll be able to just download the PowerPoint. So don't worry about taking notes, just enjoy. So what that means is that it's very unusual in Wisconsin in a presidential election for there to be less votes cast for the top of the ticket, the presidential ticket, than there are for down ballot races. So that means that the Ron Johnson, Russ Feingold race and other down ballot races, people voted more for those races than they did for president, which is something that's really unusual. And based on what we're going to see here in a little bit, there's a good explanation for why that happened. But to continue looking at how Democrats didn't show up, so Trump got 6,000 more votes than Mitt Romney did in 2012. So Trump gained Republican votes, some crossovers you'll see. But Clinton, this is a huge number, got 236,000 less votes than Obama did in 2012, which is astonishing. When you consider that she lost by, I think it was 27,000 votes, she got 236,000 less votes than Obama did in 2012. And what we really saw was that was consistent with the national trend. And getting into a few more of the numbers here that are really interesting and are really important for our discussion here. So compared to Obama 2012, Hillary Clinton lost ground among some key voting groups. So among those, women voters, especially white women, but overall women voters, Clinton lost 5% compared to Obama 2012. And as you've probably seen in the exit polls, white women went largely for Trump. Youth under 30 voters, the critical millennial vote, Clinton got 5% less than Obama. African American voters, Clinton got 6% less than Obama. And in Hispanic voters, Clinton got 5% less than Obama 2012. Right? So the irony being, if you look at those groups, those are the demographic groups that Clinton and the Democrats have tried to cater to in terms of their issue messaging, right? Immigrants, African Americans with the Black Lives Matter movement, women voters with all the women's equality issues, and then of course trying to energize the millennials who are widely known to be a progressive generation. And yet those groups were the ones that didn't turn out in the largest numbers. And I mentioned that this was a national trend. There's a great graphic in the New York Times. Look at that map. This shows where Trump made gains compared to 2012. So these are shifts by county in 2012, and look at the deep red that's happening in the upper Midwest. And you see virtually no blue. There's a little bit out in Utah. There's a little bit of blue, a little bit on the east and west coast, but not compared to the sea of red in the upper Midwest. So this wasn't just a Wisconsin phenomenon. This was a nationwide trend. And to underscore, since we're focusing on Wisconsin tonight, just to underscore that this is not something that just happened overnight. This has been a trend that has been playing out over at least 8 years. I would argue longer than that. But if you look at the first map on the left, 2008, focus on those counties in western Wisconsin that are deeper blue, kind of along the Mississippi Valley there. Notice how those went very largely for Obama in 2008. Then look at 2012. You see that those counties have shifted a little bit more towards, well, a little less Democrat, I guess. They're still light blue, but getting lighter blue. And then, of course, this year, and actually, good question, Steve. Yeah, each of those maps there are JPEGs, and you'll be able to click on them and download them yourself from the PowerPoint. And then you look, of course, this year, 2016, with the exception of La Crosse County, largely due to La Crosse itself, you see that virtually the entire Mississippi Valley has gone red. And one of the things that was pointed out in the New York Times article was that shift between the East Mississippi Valley, the West Mississippi Valley, in that Minnesota and Iowa corridor there, across the river from Wisconsin, it was the largest shift to Republicans in the entire country. So again, this was an emerging trend. This was not something that happened overnight. So that's important to our discussion. And why is that important for our discussion? Because one of the things that I have taken a great deal of interest in, and that has been fairly widely reported on in the news, are these rationalizations. And I call them false rationalizations because they're based on reason. They're based on a misplaced reason, but reason nonetheless. These are otherwise known as excuses. And these are basically the top four that are being used by both DPW in the state and DNC nationally. So this idea that there was an anti-Trump tsunami, or sorry, anti-establishment tsunami, not anti-Trump, anti-establishment tsunami. And something that a colleague of mine who is in the Democrat Party pointed out is that this is blatantly false, because the incumbent party, the Republicans, many of whom are incumbent legislators, increased their majorities in both Wisconsin legislative houses, in both the Senate and Assembly. So the idea that this was some kind of anti-establishment movement that played out in Wisconsin is bogus, because we have the incumbent establishment increase their hold on the legislative houses. So that's something that is really important to keep in mind. So moving on, next, the redistricting. Now granted, redistricting may have played a factor in some of the assembly seats. But when you look at those county by county shifts that are happening over time, those are not, that's not happening by an assembly district or a Senate district. It's happening from county to county. And that shift's taken place over time. So that has nothing to do with redistricting. And also Trump winning in Wisconsin has nothing to do with redistricting. That was a statewide election, and again, you see Ron Johnson beat Russ Feingold relatively handily, and that also has nothing to do with. And hold on to that thought about Dems being seen as more establishment, because that's a very valid comment that is going to play into what we have coming up here. So, and in fact, it's relative to the next two rationalizations or excuses. First one is that there's this idea that voter ID cost Democratic votes in the city of Milwaukee. We saw much lower turnout in Milwaukee than previously, and there seems to be this idea that it's because of voter ID. And again, this is a bogus excuse. Voter ID is a problem. Make no mistake about it. If there is any single person anywhere that is denied their right to vote because of something as awful as voter ID, when they are legally have the right to vote, then our democracy suffers. But in terms of it costing the election, even the election commissioner in Milwaukee, who's a Democrat, disputes this theory. He said that there's no way that voter ID cost Democrats the election. And there's more data on that a little bit later. Finally, and this goes to Don's comment about Dems being seen as more establishment. And I think that in rural areas, this speaks volumes to why, for many people, they don't even consider voting Democrat. Even people who voted twice for Obama in rural areas, and there's a lot of them who voted twice for Obama, and this year went and cast their ballot for Donald Trump. And it's this idea of stupid rural voters, that they don't understand the issues. How many times did we hear that during the Walker campaigns? Over the last 8 years, all the elections and campaigns in Wisconsin that Democrats were struggling with and lost, how many times did we hear that phrase about, oh, those stupid rural voters, they just don't understand the issues. And how stupid are they? They're just voting against their own self-interest. That's doing the most damage, and it's fueling this conservative metaphor of Democrats as the liberal elite. And many of you who have heard Mike McCabe talk, you know that he's kind of railed on the fact that the Democrats have become the party of the urban elite. And it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy of, conservatives decades ago labeling Democrats as the liberal elite, and now they're behaving that way by making comments like this. The other point to be made about this excuse is that, and this is going to segue into our next little segment here, is that this is not an urban and rural problem. This has, yes, the biggest and most noticeable shift happened in the rural areas, and it was historic. But let's face it, this was a problem in both urban and rural areas of Wisconsin. This was not just a rural problem. This is a values and beliefs identity problem. And people are going to say, oh, well, Scott, you just say that because that's what you do and that's what you want it to be about. But let's look at the evidence. So if we're going to pay attention to the evidence, let's look at what happened. We know that many people who voted for Obama either stayed home or they voted for Trump. We saw that shift in the rural areas, particularly in the upper Midwest. So the question is, how did the Democratic machine miss this outcome? Right? We've heard so much about how great the Democratic data system is, how great the ground game was, how great the structure was for Hillary Clinton because she kind of built on the Obama machine. How did they miss that? And I would argue it's two things. They're too focused on identity politics and favorable demographic shifts. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So identity politics is you're basing your policies on people's identity, right? So you have women's issues, you have Black Lives Matter, you have Hispanic and immigrant issues, you have workers' issues, you have environmental issues, and all of your policies and your politics and the way you behave and what you do is focused on those identities. And encompassing that is this idea of favorable demographic shifts, i.e. conservative people are getting older, they're dying off, and the younger people coming up are much more progressive. So they're just going to automatically vote Democrat. So all we have to do is bide our time, and the demographics will shift to have, more immigrants, more minorities, younger, more progressive voters. So the demographic shift will take care of itself. Right? So they focus on those two things. And what they're ignoring is what we know really matters. People's hopes, dreams, values, and beliefs are what matter to them. Right? So, and here's a point that Mike McCabe has been making for a long time, and which is critically important, is this idea that if you're focused on just identity politics and you're relying on demographic shifts and you're just trying to work the data so you get out the vote and you saturate your best areas to get out the vote, right? You're not listening. If you get out to areas and listen to people and what affects their lives and not have an agenda but just get out there and listen, you start to hear what really matters. And I would argue that this is the most important data that current strategies are missing. And I have a couple examples for you. And what I would really encourage you to do is if you have others based on your own experiences, maybe that echo this or are possibly related to it, feel free to type them in and share with the group, because these are really important. And had the strategists been listening, I think there could have been some things done that would have mitigated what happened in this election. So first of all, in the New York Times from November 21st, 2016, and you can look, there's a great article. Many people in Milwaukee neighborhood didn't vote and don't regret it. And this reporter went in to one of the poorest cities in Milwaukee, or poorest areas in Milwaukee, an area that is solidly Democratic, that has traditionally very high turnout, but this election saw somewhere in the neighborhood of a 20% drop in turnout. And this reporter hung out all day in a local barber shop and talked to dozens of people who came in. And I just pulled out some of the highlights there because maybe you've heard some of these same things in your communities. So the first one was one of the barbers said, "I don't feel bad for not voting," Mr. Fleming said. "Milwaukee is tired. Both of them, the candidates, were terrible, and they never do anything for us anyway." So what does that say? Next one. This was talking to one of the patrons. So he said, "No president had done anything to improve the lives of black people, including Mr. Obama, whom he voted for twice. It's like I should have known this would happen. We're worse off than before." And in the story, they say this person actually went and voted for Clinton, but was not happy with it and didn't expect that anything would change. Okay. So again, what is that saying? The next one is, this is an observation from the reporter. Perhaps the biggest drags on voter turnout in Milwaukee, as in the rest of the country, so speaking to the consistent trend, were the candidates themselves. To some, it was like having to choose between broccoli and liver. And then finally, so this is another client who's talking, and this was reflected a lot in the article, this idea. He, Trump, was real. Unlike a lot of liberal Democrats who are just as racist, but keep hidden, he said, his jaw slaughtered with shaving cream. I found this a really fascinating comment when we talked about listening. You can reason with them all day long, but they think they know it all. They want to have control. Yeah, I like liver too. You can reason with them all day long, but they think they know it all. They want to have control, that they know what's best for, quote unquote, those people. Right? So apply that idea of, right, the liberal elite. Don, as you pointed out, the Dems as establishment, because of this whole liberal elite metaphor that's taken a hold and the way they behave, especially concerning this person's comment that they want to have control. What does that say? So there's the urban Milwaukee observation. So the next qualitative data we're going to look at is from a surprisingly insightful piece in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. This is just from a couple days ago, and kudos to this reporter for driving all the way from Milwaukee to Adams County. I'm sure you can find this. It's still one of the most read stories online. In western Wisconsin, Trump voters want change. Now, they talked to a lot of Trump voters, and they all voiced the same thing. Now, what I want you to pay attention, since we're talking about it not being a rural-urban issue, but just a rural issue, but it's an overall values, beliefs issue. Listen to these comments. So the first one is from a farmer. "We're supposed to be one of the most prosperous countries in the world, and you know what? I'm 52 years old. I'm raising 2 kids by myself for 10 years, and I can't get ahead. Who does that sound like? Does that... If you put those two stories, urban and rural, side by side, right? Who's from Milwaukee? Who's from rural Wisconsin? Right? What color skin is that person? Could you tell? No. Fascinating. The second one. I just did not like Hillary. Right? How many times did you hear people just, I think back to that Simon Sinek, start with why video where he starts talking about people's gut feelings, their gut reactions to things, and it's like, it just doesn't feel right. I can't put my finger on it, but it just doesn't fit, right? So this person says that they didn't like Hillary. They'd have voted for Bernie, and they did vote for Bernie in the primary. He, Trump, is not a Washington insider. He's not owned by the oil companies or Buffett or Gates. That's a lot of it, and I was hoping he'd change some things. And this person went off and voted for Trump, right? Bernie voter in the primary, Trump voter in the general, right? What he said is huge. It's a really big deal because he's talking about values and beliefs and what democracy should be. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Third one, I know that Trump is no saint, said Ed Tullius, who planted a Hillary for Prison sign in his front yard in Whitehall. But I really think that for me and a lot of people I know around here, it was a way to break the system. And finally, this sounds just like urban Wisconsin to me. I think a lot of middle-class families, we feel the last 15 or 20 years that slowly and slowly and slowly everything's being taken away from us, almost eliminating the middle class altogether. Right? So, now try to convince me that it's a rural problem. Right? Because that's what people are saying. That's what Democratic strategists are saying. That's what Jen Schilling said in her press release when she was elected minority leader again. She said, we need to figure out how to communicate with rural voters. I would argue you need to figure out how to communicate with people, period, and connect with their values and beliefs. So, I'd like to open this up to comments because what I'd like to see if you can relate to some things here. What are people expressing here, right? So we just saw rural and urban Wisconsin, right? Clearly there are common values and ideas being evoked, right? I think there's a dozen of you, at least, maybe more. Yeah, there's more than a dozen of you watching this, and you've probably all thought a lot about progressive values and things like that. And what are the common values and ideas that are being evoked here? And this is from the inner city, one of the poorest areas of Milwaukee, the state, one of the most segregated areas of the entire country, right? People are saying the same thing as they said in largely white, homogeneous, white milk rural Wisconsin, right? Where Democrats say people are stupid and vote against their own self-interest. So what are people saying? I have some ideas I'll share, but yeah, that's a good observation. I mean, what did the Democratic campaigns, we know that, so I'll relate a quick story. So back when I met with I can turn my camera on so you're not just there. Now you can just look at the big head, the big talking head. When I met with some of the party strategists back, this is a year and a half ago, I was told, look, there's nothing we can do about message in the state because everything's controlled at the top of the ticket. We have Hillary Clinton's campaign will come in and they'll tell us what to say, and everybody's got to follow her message. So what was her message? Anybody? Bueller? I mean, it was, I'm with her, right? It was that kind of, there's the politics of identity again. Oh yeah, right, spot on. The message of stronger together in that, oh, yes, sure, I can go back to the slides. Somebody wants to see the slides again. Oops. There we go. So there's the rural. So yeah, there's the rural Wisconsin. Yeah, right, and the stronger together, and what does that mean? I mean, Republicans would say stronger together. Yeah, exactly. Got it covered. Politics of personality. Yeah, so there's rural Wisconsin, and there's the Milwaukee, the urban area. And here's to the point that the comment somebody just made. What was it? The Hillary's got it covered comment. Right. There was the whole Hillary's always got our back, so we should have hers. That was a message, right? And whose back has she had? Specific groups. If this is democracy, it's not working for us. Yeah, right. So, but what does democracy that works for us look like? Right? Meanwhile, what is Trump saying? Trump is saying, I'm going to make America great again. We need to live up to the promise. He talked, and you heard people that voted for him, a lot of them didn't say it in public, but all of the misogynistic and racist stuff that he was saying, people were like, yeah, that's how he is. Yeah, and attacks on Trump, yes. In fact, the Guardian very early on had a great op-ed that said Hillary Clinton better stand for something. She better be for something. You can't just win on attacks. Right, so you're all getting this, and the values, and I mean, here's the biggest thing, right? Why did people vote for Trump? Why did nearly, and I agree, yes, and that's not okay, and that is who he is. But one of the things that we saw happen in this election was that the people were so uninspired by the Clinton campaign that they didn't show up, to the tune of almost 250,000 people, less than showed up for Obama, right? And the result of that, Nancy, to your point, was that a guy who said all those nasty things and who's basically a bully and a spoiled, rotten kid, got elected because he knew what he was doing. He was seen as, he was just authentic. He was authentically who he was. He never changed who he was. And what his message did was it communicated to the people who, and here's the important part, to the people that were inspired by his vision, by Trump's vision. It motivated, I'll get to that in a second. Good point, Nancy. It motivated them in those critical areas to win the Electoral College, which is how we elect the president, to elect him president. Now, the two, yes, agreed. And and had she had a positive vision, had she provided a really positive progressive message, she could have gotten 5 million more votes. Absolutely, because of the number of people that didn't show up. That's absolutely true. But here's the problem with that is that we elect the president based on the Electoral College, and don't underestimate that the Republicans and the Trump strategy was to get those key Electoral College votes and win in the upper Midwest, such as in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I mean, look at Minnesota. You know, Minnesota should have been hugely Democratic. It wasn't. It was unbelievably close, as was Illinois. I mean, some of the states that went for Clinton were way closer than they should have been. Right? So there's all sorts of things at play here. There's authenticity, of being consistent with the frame and who you are. There's positive message, progressive message, communicating that vision authentically and not reinforcing your opponent. So, this is a big deal. Most of the people voted for Trump because he gave people something to believe in. And what he presented as the positive vision to believe in resonated and motivated his people more than Hillary's. Game, set, match. And yes, Don, you are absolutely right. Yes. And that shouldn't have happened. Right. And that's correct. Hillary didn't come to Wisconsin. Why? Because she was told, and they had internal polling, that it was in the bag. So, lots and lots going on. And a lot of it having to do with, at the very beginning, that basic core of resonating with what people believe, and we've already answered this question, right? Why did they vote for Hillary? They were uninspired, right? What she represented did not align with their values and what they wanted for the future. Yeah, that's really true. And in fact, that's interesting. There was a comment this is a good story. I'll bring up my picture again so you can look at the big talking head. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to a little session put on by Dick Simpson, who's a professor of political science at the University of Illinois Chicago. He's nationally renowned for being pretty smart about political science things, and he just came out with a book, ironically titled "How to Win Elections in the 21st Century," which was written for Democrats. But one of the observations he made during that session was, well, just wait till Trump's policies kick in and all the people that voted for Trump get hurt by his policies. Then they'll have buyer's remorse, and then the Democrats will come back and win in the off-year election, right? Well, what's wrong with that assumption? Right? It assumes that people will reason, right? That they'll reason to. Good observation, Phil. Look at it this way. He's assuming that people will rationally conclude that their lives aren't getting any better because of Trump. Will they do that? No, of course not. Because they voted against the system to begin with. They voted against the establishment. They already feel that government is too intrusive in their lives. So if their lives aren't getting any better, they'll blame it on government. They'll blame it on regulations. They'll blame it on all sorts of things. They're not going to blame it on the guy they believe in. Thank you. Yes, Nancy, exactly. People aren't going to reason that way. So you can't. I'm glad that you asked that question, Connie. Yeah, you hear this all the time, and you hear Democrats all the time saying, well, we're talking about our shared values. And then they list public education, health care, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And that's actually, they are exactly related, Connie. And so the issues, the policy positions we take on issues are a result of our values. So the issues, the positions we take, and the things we believe in them because of our values. So, but to say that values get spelled out in issues is really not true, because I could show you a lot of examples of Democrats talking about the economy, and they talk about conservative ideas. They talk about job creation. They talk about competition in the free market. So there are lots of examples where Democrats don't spell out their values on issues, and they actually evoke conservative ideas on issues. But to your point, it's something that we can start doing. We can start evoking our values when we talk about issues, and I'm glad you asked that, because it takes me to the next slide. Well done, well done. Yeah, there's a lot of good comments. I mean, and maybe the disillusioned Trump voters will be ready for a third party, or maybe they're going to be ready for a new kind of Democrat that doesn't act like a Democrat or doesn't behave like a Democrat, that actually listens to them. Yeah, spot on. So the next thing I want to get to is, oops. So we know that the Democratic problem is not, it's not a demographic problem, it's not a rural-urban problem, it's actually a beliefs issue. And we've got to start winning hearts and minds. And this is, of course, a rhetorical question. Do we have ideas and values that will inspire and motivate people? I would say yes. If you look at just kind of harken back to the comments that those people were making, and what they were evoking is this idea that freedom and democracy is not working for them anymore. So here's what I'm going to present. And for all the groups I'm working with Mike McCabe and all the other people, people in rural areas and urban areas, I'm going to start pushing this. That let's start redefining democracy and freedom in the progressive frame. Because right now, a lot of those people that pulled the lever for Trump, they were acting in their self-interest. Putting themselves at the top of the hierarchy and saying, Trump, you're going to be our authoritarian leader who is going to free us up to act in our self-interest again, and then everything will be better. So I would argue we need to offer the complete opposite moral picture of that. And you can look at this, you've seen these values before, but I'm coming back to them to redefine democracy and freedom, because I think, especially in rural areas, this would resonate with a lot of people. Especially in rural areas where, in farming communities, you got to take care of your neighbors. You got to help each other, right? Your neighborhood, your towns, your communities, they only work when people act responsibly for others. And yeah, Nancy, that gets to your point that, right, putting the authoritarian figure like Trump in charge, it does allow for that normalizing that you're talking about. Whereas if we start evoking an idea of freedom comes with responsibility for others, the idea of the golden rule, do unto others, right? That starts to counter the normalization of those types of actions, because then we start acting with empathy towards others and setting the example. So let's start doing that, right? So when people start talking in those hateful terms, start evoking empathy for people. Everybody was taught the golden rule, do unto others. That look, our democracy, our nation is only going to be successful when we start acting responsibly for others, not just in our own self-interest. And you can think of hundreds of examples of that. And yes, it is rooted in the community framework. Absolutely it is. And I would go so far as to say it's rooted in the family framework. For a lot of people, bring it down to the family level, right? What does a happy, prosperous family, how does that function? It's when you take care of each other. It's when you take responsibility not only for yourself, but for others, right? Our prosperity depends on each other. And then it brings you to some really important points that need to be connected in rural areas. And it's the last two at the bottom there. Private prosperity depends on the public, which is each other, because we're a government of, by, and for the people. And that public and elected officials have a moral responsibility to protect and empower the people they serve. Right? Talk about the irony of that statement, right? Hillary saying it takes a village, but she couldn't communicate that idea in this election. And whoever told her to abandon that, you should be, yeah. And it is. Mark, to your point, it is New Testament values, right? And, right, the idea, how ridiculous is it to see Trump as a public servant? He doesn't fit the frame. And that's a good way to counter him, right? With the idea that, look, you need roads that are drivable in rural areas. You need high-speed internet. You need great public schools. You need a prosperous community. You need all of these things. And guess what? We all rely on each other for that, and those are things that we do together. And then the idea of everybody doing their fair share comes into play as well. So we're coming up on time here a little bit because I want to play a video for you to close. It's probably something that you haven't seen because I think it's critically important to understanding how we communicate with people. But you can look at these value ideas and really start figuring out how to apply them in your areas, and we're going to work on this. This is going to be the subject of a lot of back and forth between all of us and how we actually, I'm going to go back to that, Nancy, and answer your question. Those aren't issues, actually. So the issues, hold on, let me pull this up real quick here. Okay, so freedom and democracy are not issues. So the frame that you understand democracy and freedom within is dependent on your frame. Okay, so for example, democracy and freedom for conservatives means the freedom to do what you want without regard for others, and democracy should function to free you up to do that. So government should function to allow for you to have the maximum liberty. Okay? In the progressive frame, democracy and freedom means something completely different. It means that we take care of each other, that we have responsibility not only for ourselves but others, and that's what our country represents. And those are the things, right, to your point, Nancy, we need to define. Infrastructure, high-speed internet, right? You can't do that by yourself. Okay? We have to start working together and coming together just as you do in a family. So those are the ideas that I'm asking you to apply to your issues, right? So Nancy, to your point about issues, I'm asking you to start communicating to people how those views of freedom and democracy apply to the issues that are important in your communities. Public education, infrastructure, health care, equality, things like that. So I hope that makes sense. All for one, one for all, exactly. So here's so in my mind, what DPW and DNC didn't understand is that these things that we're talking about and these ideas that I had up on the screen about freedom and democracy and all for one for all, these are more than just words. These are ideas. And ideas are way more important because they will help influence people's actions and how people behave. So how you can help and how we all need to work together is to start redefining these ideas, these critical ideas, and applying them to issues, because then, whether it's an urban or a rural area, right, those things mean the same thing to everybody. So there we go. So to conclude, there's actually exactly 10 minutes left, which means that this 10-minute video will be perfect to play out. So just quickly, this is from the Guardian series, Anywhere But Washington. And this is the final video, 10 minutes. It's called Why America Elected Donald Trump. And using what you just learned, watch this video, enjoy, and I'll leave the comment thing open so you can comment during and everything. But I think you'll really find this very, very interesting. So here we go.
The final leg of my journey, Reno, Nevada.
Good morning!
How are you?
Good morning! Are you folks excited?
Yes.
Okay, what are we gonna do? Get a victory, right?
Yes.
So, and how are we gonna do it? With joy, right? So let's go get them. We're gonna win. Let's go.
Donna Bransford had come from California to campaign for Democrats.
I've come because I'm excited about Hillary winning. I've also come because I really want to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't win. I have a 2-year-old son. Like, he was born when we had the first African-American president, and then the next president is going to be the first woman president, and that's amazing. I feel like it's going to give him such a different understanding of like what's possible for anybody.
Trump for press! Woo! Who's going to win the election?
Trump! Woo! We can't afford free college. We can't afford to take care of the rest of the world. We need to take care of our veterans especially, and our people before we bring everybody else in to take care of them.
I think a woman belongs at home, cooking and doing dishes. I don't believe that a woman should become president anytime.
You know, I have to say this much, though. The hardworking Americans that Hillary Clinton calls deplorables, I call patriots.
Joey Gilbert is a former boxer and attorney for Trump in Nevada.
Thank you.
What was it like being on stage introducing Trump? You know, for me it's emotional because you come out there and you see the intensity and the passion and the compassion in everyone's eyes. I mean, people in this country are hurting. They're not there at that rally because they got nothing better to do. They want to see this country take a turn and get on a better day, better days and a better path.
With such mixed messages, the night before the election, I turned to someone who claimed to have insight into the future.
What is the question you would like answered?
I want to know who's going to win the election.
Well, let's find out. Ooh, that's not a good card to see at the beginning for my personal preferences. As much as I internally want to cry at saying this, this reading indicates to me that Trump would win.
It's a courageous thing for you to call, though, given everyone is saying that Clinton's going to win this, if only just, and you're saying the opposite, decisively it's going to be Trump.
I am frankly hoping I'm wrong. Not because Trump himself is truly the danger, but because if he actually does win this vote, we have a large fraction of the American populace that is in alignment with fascist ideals.
I think that America is going to surprise itself today. There's a lot of people that are going to vote for Mr. Trump, so we'll see.
There is a large part of me that feels like a disenfranchised voter. Clinton seems like the Dodge of the horror. You know, you have the choice of going to hell or going to purgatory. Wow, which one do I want?
The first results of the 2016 presidential race.
This election night will be historic no matter who wins.
Who have Mama and Daddy been asking people to vote for? That's right!
First thing you notice is not many people here. Second thing you notice is not very happy faces.
The vote's coming in. She'll do fine. It's going to be a joyful night.
We have a major projection right now. Donald Trump will take Ohio.
Why are you nervous?
because I don't want that man in office. I don't. I think he'll take us back too many decades, and we've come this far, and I don't want to go back. I don't.
CNN now projects that Donald Trump will carry the state of Wisconsin. He will win Wisconsin.
Are you starting now to contemplate the fact that he might win?
No, my brain, I can't wrap my mind around it.
I'm really fearful for what it's going to mean with that man. Sorry. Yeah, with that man as president, it's very scary to me. I'm really fearful for what it's going to mean for my son and the future he's going to have in this country.
As Democrats grew nervous, Republicans realized an upset was within reach.
We're going to be able to keep our guns, our taxes are going to be lowered, we're always going to keep our Bibles, everybody. That's where we're going to keep our Bibles.
You're a bit surprised yourself, surely.
Let me tell you this. I've been saying this for a year now, that I had all the confidence and have always believed Mr. Trump was going to win this. I had friends this entire week telling me he was going to lose by 6 to 10 points. But to see where he's at right now is pretty amazing. And you're damn right. It's very rewarding.
Yeah! Oh my God!
We're taking our country back!
I can't say this is how I expected my journey to end, but neither was it a huge surprise. Looking back, it was clear from the start that this was a polarising election. It was a battle between two of the most unpopular major party candidates in history.
I wouldn't vote really for any candidate right now.
You gotta pick the better of two evils, I think.
Ain't neither one of them for the people, period.
This was a shifting electorate, younger, more diverse, ready for change, but tired of the two-party system.
We do not want the Democrats. We do not want the Republicans.
People had not just lost faith in politics, they no longer had confidence in the establishment.
It's the first time I've ever had anyone film me film them. It suggests to me that there's maybe a lack of trust.
Absolutely. People were voting in an era in which social media is distorting people's grasp of reality, against the backdrop of decades of rising inequality. My journey took me to places of extraordinary wealth, and others that have been in constant decay for half a century.
Coalfield's gone. They done timbered everything else. That leaves about everybody gone.
These were the places where I found people most invested in Trump's promise to make America great again. Poor, rural, and white. But Trump's supporters were animated by a lot more than the economy.
I don't think there was any racism until Obama got elected. And if you're black and you haven't been successful in the last 50 years, it's your own fault.
8 years after the election of the first black president, this contest revealed the country's deep racial divisions. Trump fueled and exploited those tensions. His rhetoric alienated millions. But Clinton was distrusted.
There are more and more lies about how she got her money.
She tried to make this a referendum on her opponent. Despair over Trump may have energized Latinos, helping Clinton win Nevada and Colorado. But everywhere else, the conversations I had hinted at the problem to come: low turnout among Democrats. I met African Americans angry about the unequal criminal justice system, losing hope after decades of racial segregation. But few seemed to really believe Clinton would make their lives better.
As a person in the black community, why vote for a president? You know, what impact is it really going to have on me?
I met young people who were disinterested in mainstream candidates or simply apathetic about politics.
Who are you voting for?
I'm not voting.
Why is that?
I don't know.
This election entrenched a gender divide.
What is it about her that you think people don't like so much?
She wrote that sheet back.
Many of the women I met were appalled at the prospect of a Trump presidency and truly believed this would be a historic victory for gender equality.
God bless this first president of the United States who happens to be a woman.
But many others, especially white women, did not want a first woman president if that meant Clinton in the White House. After Trump's election, America is bracing itself for conflict. But my journey has reminded me that people are more than just the candidate they vote for.
Politicians are politicians. They make promises and never keep them.
I haven't found every encounter easy, but almost everyone I've met, regardless of their politics, has been warm, open, and honest.
This is me being real, sorry.
To many of his supporters, Trump's rise is a rejection of the status quo, a reason for hope. The rest of the world is coming to terms with a demagogue in the White House, an uncertain future, a moment of despair.
Lock her up!
So, outstanding video. Our time is up, and thank you very much, everybody. So, go ahead and check out the Guardian website. The Anywhere But Washington series was excellent. I think there were 8 total. So, thanks. Have a good night forward. I hope tonight I've given you some hope that we can start turning things around in our communities and our circles. And I look forward to next time. Thanks.